Hey everyone, today's conversation is going to be really interesting. We are going to be discussing the idea of how do pharma companies, med device companies, health tech companies, cellular therapy companies, how should they be developing a pharmacy strategy? And that's actually kind of complicated. It's one of those things that you would think people have already cracked, people already know, but it's surprising because it turns out people have gotten it wrong so often that it's really you're seeing the impact of it, especially in the health tech world, because you're seeing just a lot of tech companies come in with here's the way the world should be, not understanding the way things are, and that's why the world is littered with health tech that didn't succeed. So today, a conversation about the use and the creation of a pharmacy strategy is something that I'm hoping to sort of get into. Our guest today is kind of uniquely positioned to talk about it. He's the founder and president of HCI Healthcare, and he can be reached at a variety of email addresses, which I'm going to at Siepka at hcihealthcare.net. But you can also visit his website, hcihealthcare.net, or email him at info@hcihealthcare.net. Our guest for today is Tom Siepka. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good, Darshan. How you doing today?
Good. I do want to emphasize for those people jumping on, this is Darshantalks live stream. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney. I'm a pharmacist. Tom's a pharmacist. And I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So does he. But neither one of those two things make us your attorney or your pharmacist. So it's neither legal advice nor clinical advice. These are considerations. They're for educational purposes only, and don't necessarily reflect the opinions of myself, Tom, our clients, or our employers. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please share, please subscribe. I know Tom would love to hear from you as well, so please reach out to him. You can always reach out to me on Twitter, or just go to my website at darshantalks.com. And so, Tom, we start talking about this idea. We mentioned this idea of having a pharmacy strategy. Let's start from the beginning. What do companies do wrong? Do you find companies have a pharmacy strategy when they come in?
Well, it depends on the organization. I think some are more forward thinking, and then, what it reminds me of is like, performance improvement. And key in that is the voice of the customer, right? So it's hard to solve a problem when you go in and like you said, come in with a host of solutions, but you never talk to the customer to actually ask them what the problem was, right? And to your point, that can lead to failure. So as you think about GPOs and distributors and these companies that come up with these strategies, how are they really knowing their audience, right? Other than more numbers, right? They probably get lots of sales data, information on organizations that they use to look at regions and sales strategies. But to your point, I think it's really understanding what is important to a healthcare organization, either being a hospital or clinic, a physician practice, whatever level of healthcare organization, understanding that and how that product, either IT or pharmaceutical product, helps them meet a need, right? Helps them care for their population, helps them meet a challenge that they have. Similar in consulting, that we do. I could come up with all sorts of things that I would like to do with consulting, but if it doesn't meet the needs of anyone that is looking for help, we will have a short-lived business, right? So it's a similar thing, I think, for organizations that are out there, creating products, either IT or pharmaceutical products or services, that they have to be addressing a problem and understanding that. So I think that's a critical step, right? And for those folks to be successful.
Which is kind of interesting the way you phrase that. You have to address the needs of the customer. Who is the customer? Is it the GPO? Is it the pharmacist? Is it the distributor? Is it the hospital? Is it the patient? How do you even begin to define that in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, I guess the answer is yes. Right. Right. So the GPOs came into existence as organizations struggled with cost, right? So they said, wow, if we get lots of people together and represent them and work on their behalf, right, that will drive improvements in pricing and allow those organizations to be successful. Now, what has happened over time is these organizations got big and they do great work. They've created limitations in the market sometimes. Exclusive awards, I think sometimes can be helpful, right? They give you the absolute maybe best pricing with the vendor, limit choice, number one, and number two, limit competition in the marketplace. So say one vendor is successful with the three major GPOs in the country. Whoever loses those is kind of out of business a bit, right? So it is created historically in the pharmacy world where I came from, where sometimes the looking for the lowest price has created such a shortage of product that there was no competition. Then slowly prices then increased later because there was no competitive products or there was a shortage of products. So those can be some of the backfires of GPOs. So I think the organizations focused on gaining contract access versus looking at the impact sometimes to the healthcare organizations or providers out there, or a loss of choice by the providers.
So I'm going to ask, the term GPO stands for Group Purchasing Organization. My question for you is, when you said the big three, I think of the big distributors, which is your AmerisourceBergen, your McKesson, your Cardinal. Who are the big three GPOs?
GPOs Vizient, Premier, Health Trust are probably the biggest ones that come to mind for most folks, right, in healthcare organizations. So, those group purchasing organizations work with, pharmaceutical manufacturers, technology manufacturers, like, say distribution cabinets like Omnicell and those things. And, sorry, got my son texting.
Take your time.
For broadcast.
So no problem.
Sorry.
Take care of it. You're fine.
No. Gotta love kids. No. So what I was saying is that, they would work with a variety of different manufacturers and look for pricing, right, on behalf. So it could be a pharmaceutical manufacturer, it could be a technology manufacturer. And again, some of that was good, but then it, could limit choice as a problem.
So you talk about limiting choice, which I think is critical, but I feel that we, as patients and as pharmacists, I feel like we're seeing the tail end of a bunch of different filtering. And what I mean by that is you've got obviously the distributors that your Cardinal, AmerisourceBergen, McKesson, who decide who have a huge play in what's going to be carried. You have Vizient, Premier, and Health Trust, each of who decide what you'll negotiate for, and then you've got the three big PBMs who are all deciding what they'll pay for. In reality, I guess my question is, as a pharmacist, how much control do you actually have as to what you give to your patient?
So I think years ago, a lot of the formulary decisions were held by the physicians and providers working in collaboration with healthcare organizations. That has kind of shifted over time a bit. I would say with interchangeable medications, these days, most folks say generics. There's really no debate about using one product over another. So pharmacies and pharmacists have a lot of choice in generic products that they carry. But when it comes to branded items, it was still held, I would say a while ago by the healthcare organizations and the providers. Then it kind of shifted a bit where the GPOs gained a little more influence. So say there were several products in a category that were very similar. The GPO would try to get the best price. And then as long as they were clinically equivalent, healthcare organizations could then look at that and say, do we want to take advantage of this GPO pricing? We view them clinically equivalent as well and pick a particular product. I think what's changed, a dynamic change in the market that shifted these balances of like who has the authority, right, to really, do this. The insurers and PBMs, again, trying to correct pricing, hold pricing for employers, right, that hire them to manage these benefits, have kept the, those choices and said, okay, this product is what we're going to pay for a reimbursable care. So if you look at it from a GPO and hospital standpoint, if you have a really good price on a product that will not be paid for by the insurer payer,
right,
who's going to carry that? There's been a lot of debate about, well, let us pick the product and we'll agree on price, right? And sometimes that's successful, sometimes it isn't. But I think there's been a shift where the insurers and PBMs now are inserting more control in that process, and the manufacturers are picking up on that. So at times they will bypass a GPO a bit, or the hospital organization, and work more directly with the payer or the PBM, the insurer, to work on these and say, okay, we'll look to have our product as a preferred product, right, on your formulary of what drugs will be covered by you, the insurer. So I think that's created some issues. Like when I worked with GPOs, and I worked with some of the largest ones that we kind of mentioned, and sat on their committees, this was a discussion point as healthcare organizations. To your question, did we still have the choice that we used to have, right? One would say, well, the provider has the ultimate choice. He can write for it. But, my wife's a provider, right? She's a healthcare provider. It's hard to write for things if it's not going to be paid for. Then the patient could say, okay, I want that product, but I have to pay out of pocket for it 100%.
Right.
They're not going to do that. So I think there's been a shift in that dynamic, and that relationship that you talked about, just to get back to that, with the distributors like AmerisourceBergen and Cardinal and McKesson, and then the GPOs that are out there, these group purchasing organizations like Health Trust or Vizient or Premier as the larger ones. Everybody is taking fees and taking distributions in that model, right?
Yeah.
For the services that they provide to either contract or distribute and deliver, those medications and products to places. So I think, the model it's still effective, right? That, everybody's pretty much a member of some type of GPO, and everyone is working with the insurers, right? Making sure that the products they carry and the things that are prescribed for, they meet the patient's needs, but they're going to be covered by insurance. And I think a lot of those changes too, with that shift to the insurer market is interesting, right? Because it's kind of upsetting what was the historical balance and controls and measures. And I don't know if at times the GPOs, like, what's the right solution there? So some of them are trying to get involved in the PBM space more,
right? Well, explain that to me. What does that mean? Be more involved in the PBM space more?
Well, they hear from their members, right? That we're because a lot of healthcare organizations that are larger are also at risk for their employee benefit, right? So self-insured a bit. They basically pay for those claims, and it's managed on their behalf by a PBM. A lot of these organizations that are larger, more complex, will say, you know what, we have some ability to manage formulary. We're a healthcare organization, right? We know how to pick products, and they're looking for more control. So they've turned to folks, and sometimes the GPO will help provide a solution in this space and try to provide services so they can have some PBM-like functions within the health system. So some organizations are doing that and a bit, but they can't do this for their entire population of patients, but more for their employees, right? So some of the GPOs have like a solution in that space. Some are just partnering with a large, PBM and saying, hey, we have a great PBM partner who is one of the big PBMs out there, which is, Caremark, CVS, Optum, some big ones that are out there. They'll partner with one of those and say, we have a preferred pricing agreement. So they get a little more of a discount if you use that method. But yeah, so that dynamic change, I've talked about it a few times when I've done presentations before, looking at that shift, because I feel as if you're a pharmacy director in charge, or a pharmacy leader at an organization charged with managing the formulary, and your GPO they got a great agreement. This happened initially in the market with Remicade, which is a J&J product, and these biosimilars launched in the marketplace. And that was a perfect example of that discussion point between GPOs trying to get pricing because these biosimilars were at a lower rate, the manufacturer trying to hold on to the marketplace. So there were incentives with insurers to keep that preferred product on formulary. So there were times where the GPO would offer, and this was in the early stages. I think that market's changed now and the biosimilars are much more widely accepted. But at the beginning, it was a time where those biosimilars were not really covered by the insurers, that the insurers would be looking for use of the legacy product, which was a little more expensive. So, all interesting discussion points, right? How does that happen? What are the influences of who controls the formulary?
So it's interesting. So what I hear you talk about is the shift of power. But how recent would you say the shift of power has been? Like, when did it start happening, you
It's
think?
not like it just happened like last Monday, right? All of a sudden, everything gets changed. This has kind of been morphing and changing over time a little bit. I think as PBM started, where they were maybe more historically as a claims processing mechanism to
Right.
more of a formulary management mechanism. So that evolution change started to change the market a little bit and how these folks connected. And I would say it was years. Probably in the last 5 years or so, you've seen the shift kind of happen. Prior to that, I think it was still a little more traditional. But as these changes started happening and these things accelerated, you started to see this dynamic shift happen with these decisions. Well, like, who's controlling these decisions now?
So my question then is, if you were going to be in a scenario where you are launching a new product, do you think that in a scenario like that, the pharma company needs to now consider this new dynamic, and should they be targeting PBMs, GPOs, the pharmacist directly, or obviously they need to target all of them in different forms.
Mhm.
But what is, if you were strategizing, what are the thoughts going through your head as you start deciding what's the right format for a particular pharma company?
Yeah, I think, because the cost of, and some of this is because of the type of products that are coming out now. I think we have medications and therapies, sometimes not even a medication. It wouldn't be considered like a traditional medication, but some cellular therapies and things that come out that are very impactful, life-changing, curing or really suppressing disease where historically it was just managed. And the pricing of these things is gotten much higher. So I think, part of it is a recognition of that, because, I think the cost of these pharmaceuticals has gotten so much higher that dynamic shifted, where before it was, the insurance company would have a basic reimbursement rate based off of AWP or average sales price, plus or minus percentages. They would have kind of a table and let the provider kind of manage the formulary choice, the treatment regimen, and therapy. And then, the providers and the healthcare organizations will work with the GPOs, and the GPOs, if the organization didn't do it directly with the manufacturer, the GPOs work with the manufacturer to, work on pricing and contracting on behalf of their members. But I think what's happened is some of these medications and therapies have gotten so astronomically expensive. Some of these therapies are hundreds of thousands, that it is not, the insurer's like, well, wait a minute. We want to have some criteria around this, prior authorizations or reviews. And that whole mechanism has started over years, where it was first like kind of covered. Oh, well, we have a more restricted formulary, and some of these other therapies, we want to make sure you've tried all these other therapies first before you go to these therapies, and kind of a shift to this land now of prior authorizations, approvals, and restrictions of formularies based in payers, driven really by I think, the growth and the cost of medications. But at the same point, we've seen dramatic improvements in care of these patients, right, with these medications that we have. So it's kind of that shift in pricing, this move. And I think manufacturers, when you say what should they focus on, they want to make sure their product is used by the population that they made that product for, that they targeted or they're trying to service. So,
Right.
It is multi-pronged, right? They're not going to avoid talking to physicians or going to hospitals and talking to pharmacies and GPOs, but I think they are paying more attention now to the formularies of the payers and the PBMs, because at the end of the day, if nobody's going to pay for that therapy, it's going to be hard for them to have, their company, other than selling a product, is selling making a product that's going to be used, as having it sold and bought and covered by insurers and payers. Which then goes back to the employers that back all of those plans up. So, they are going to pay a lot more attention now to those payers and PBMs. And that could be good or bad, right? Depending on how much power is shifted to that. I think there might be manufacturers that feel like, well, wait a minute, we want the physicians to have more of a say, and kind of circle back to that, where they were before.
Which is sort of that big circle, like you said, we're going through, and we're always changing who's making the decisions. There has recently been, and I'd say recently, I mean probably over the last 3 to 5 years. I say 3 to 5, but I'm not even sure I count COVID as time for the last 2 years. But there has recently, let's just leave it at recently, been this push that maybe it's important to think of the entire healthcare ecosystem instead of just thinking about oh, you know what, we want to target prescribers.
Exactly.
Pharmacists obviously become a really important gatekeeper in that process. I can think of a few different places pharmacists become gatekeepers. It's what product they keep on the shelves. It's they're typically involved in the formulary decision-making process. They are an intimate component of which product gets recommended. And in the end, whether or not a physician writes the order, it's the pharmacist who's going to go, does this make sense? So they're involved at these multiple checkpoints. I'm sure I've missed a few because I just made that up off the top of my head.
No, you're right on with that, Darshan. I gave a talk. I don't know if it's okay to say. I was speaking at the Illuminate Omnicell conference earlier this year. And one of the infographics that I had in my presentation was exactly what you said. It was the healthcare ecosystem. So you didn't, either you're brilliant or you saw it out there, but this type of thing exists. And you're right. There's not one particular area. Right? You think about all the government agencies with CMS or 340B and these other programs that influence, pharmaceutical choice and coverage and things. So there's all these different areas, right? And the entire ecosystem that is really impacting healthcare right now. You can't just say it's one thing. So I totally agree with you.
So if there is this entire ecosystem, how does a pharma company engage in a way that's meaningful to pharmacists so that patients can benefit? I mean, let's be honest. Right now, between COVID and the fact that, and this started before COVID, to be honest, but between COVID and the fact that pharmacies and formulary committees are saying, we don't want to talk to you, pharma company. We don't want to give access to your salespeople. We don't know how much value your medical affairs department is bringing to us. Access has become a major concern. How do these companies go from I have a product to pitch you to I have value to demonstrate? And what have you seen be successful?
Well, I mean, for larger organizations, I think the obvious answer is research, right? So there is a heavy connection and partnership between healthcare organizations and pharma companies and research. So a few of the organizations I worked at before in Boston, up at Dartmouth Hitchcock in New Hampshire, large research programs, pharmaceutical companies are partnered, like at BIDMC Boston, when I was there, we were doing work with J&J on the COVID vaccine, right? Talk about a partnership that's going to help the population. We weren't worried about contracts and prices and things like that. So, that's one area. I think the other area is getting away from sales and partnering. So, it is a business, right? If the pharma companies don't sell their products, they don't generate revenue, they can't do research and develop new products and look to cure or treat disease. So I understand that. But it is to a point where utilizing the medication, like say that med service, right, for drug information, instead of just kind of like pamphleting a clinical area blindly with material, let's get it focused to, again, what are the needs of the customer? So the customer for the pharmaceutical company can be the patient. The customer could be the physician and provider. It could be the healthcare organization. It could be the pharmacy. It could be all different people, right? So learning what the needs of the customers are and then addressing those needs. So is it more information? Is it patient assistance? A lot of them have very good patient assistance programs. When we had our retail and specialty pharmacies, we worked with Pharma, right, to say what kind of programs can we get to assist our patients when they need those medications, right? So a drug is only as successful if the patient actually uses it and takes it appropriately. Yeah. Right? So I think those are all the good points, and then partnering with them to say, okay, we want to educate our providers. We might not want you to be in front of the audience doing the full education, but we will work with you to get the materials and information we need when we're looking at, say, a class of medications or therapies to do that. And then working with them for formula review, getting information from the company. Some of it's published, what's, a lot of people won't use unpublished information, right? Because it's, it could be, subjective, but working with the companies to make sure they have the right information. So the clinical reviewers can look at the full portfolio of information on a product before making a decision. So those are all partner points. And then there's pricing and contracting and those points as well, right? Because the organizations are trying to control their costs. So that is probably, partnership and friction point at the same time, where the GPOs and the distributors come in on behalf of, some centers that try to drive some relief there.
So that's kind of interesting to me, because what you're talking about is these different places pharma companies can impact healthcare, in that you're talking about answering questions, et cetera. But to me, except for the research, which is the pharma company really reaching out to take that next step forward, the rest feel more responsive. I pharmacy, I formulary committee have a question. Pharma, can you answer my question? As opposed to how do I actually get to a point where I need to at least tell you I have a product, I have research, there was a new study that came out, or there's a nuance in the study we had, and I want to make sure we're clear about this. How do you even get to a person who can actually understand that? Like I'll speak to myself. When I was working in a hospital, large academic institution, we often struggled with understanding the nuance. We obviously, I could read Up to Date and I could read Micromedics and everything else, but I always found myself a little bit behind the curve as to what is the latest and greatest out there. You could go to the CE, CME kind of talks, but that volume for me at least had dropped down significantly by the time I was finishing up my career. So what has been your experience with that? Did you feel in your role you still got inundated with all of that and it was just too much?
Well, no, I think, my positions, I was like in the CPO level, but I was in director positions before, and
exactly.
I was a clinical leader. I think some of the best people in pharmacy are like clinical directors, clinical managers that are probably more frontline with the pharmaceutical companies. And like in my team structure, I would look at that as one of the key people to be working, having communication, I think is key. I think the pharma company's looking for it and the hospital organization needs it to have an open door of communication, right? To your point, if it's only a one-way communication, you might not be aware of changes and updates and other things like that. So, but, I could hear maybe clinical people like getting ready on this call saying, if they really open the floodgates, they would be in meetings with pharma like 5 days a week, almost.
Exactly.
Right.
That's not productive either. Yeah.
No. So it's a balance. It's getting, information. I would still meet with key companies that we did a lot of work with. We carried a large portfolio of their products just to know what they're doing. How can they help our organization and patients from a leadership perspective? My clinical leader would work with them on clinical advancements, updates, things like that, to bring that back. And I think one of the changes we've seen, and this is with the restrictions in pharma, supporting educational events and all those things that you could probably give a talk on as a pharmaceutical lawyer person, Darshan, right? But it is like when I was earlier in my career, there was many of those that you could go to. You'd argue if some of the information was favored for certain, focusing on certain outcomes and things like that.
Yeah.
But there was many more of those. That has kind of fallen away where, the few places you can get it, you're going to get it more in conferences and meetings, some of the online programs from colleges, universities. So it is really, necessary for the hospital, the organization, to have some lines of communication with pharma to bring this information in so they can make good decisions.
I thought what you said was really interesting, where you said the clinical people deal with the formulary decisions and some of the more frontline decisions. But you made this comment, which I think is really interesting. And most people, I think, miss that part of it, which is how can you help the overall organization? What have been some examples of situations where companies have done exactly that?
Well, and this relates to some of the new changes, when we talked about the distribution network and as insurers and PBMs and things have gotten into the space of making more decisions on formulary choice, they've also restricted at times distribution choice, right? So a pharmacy that was not in network, either with the manufacturer or with the insurer, couldn't or can't fill that prescription or provide therapy to that patient. It has to come from another channel. So that is probably an example point of not being a good partner, right? So if you can agree on price and everything else, and then what's the issue? Why won't you let that pharmacy provide that service to their patient at that organization? So I think some of the detriment, some of the bad pieces that have come out of this shift in control is exclusivity, and either retail pharmacies out there. I'm not talking about CVS and Walgreens, right? But if Darshan and Tom opened up the corner drugstore in our town, and we want to service our population, sometimes those pharmacies can't access certain products, can't provide certain therapies. Now, some of these therapies now are much more advanced, right? They need a lot of special handling and training, and they don't go through retail pharmacies. They go through specialty pharmacy, and there's a lot more support services around those type of patients. But I think if an organization meets those criteria, meets all of the standards that are set out there, and there's multiple certifying bodies that will go and say, yes, you have a good specialty pharmacy, you meet all of our criteria, you are certified by either URAC or ACHC or some of these other bodies out there. If you meet the criteria, you should, and you agree to the pricing, you should be allowed to network to service patients, right? And that doesn't always happen. So I think what I think pharma can do a better job of is looking at a better way to partner, right? It should be about the patient, right? And giving the patient access to care, not making it difficult for them to access care in a certain manner. There's probably plenty of people that could jump on this call from the industry that will say, no, well, we set up this preferred channel because we can provide the best service and really control our pricing. That's right. To say, but if you can kind of wipe the pricing out, then why limit it? Why limit the patient's choice if they have a pharmacy closer to their home, or they like the pharmacy that the healthcare organization has and they want to continue with their care there because there's a better coordination, right? The providers are all in the building. They talk to each other. A lot of times they're on the same EMR system. I would argue that's a better model for care than having that disjointed and having that, you say one part of the care goes to this other pharmacy group that is got this exclusive arrangement with this insurer or manufacturer, and they're the only ones that can provide that therapy, but all the documentation, everything is not in that patient's record directly, right? So it's just an interesting, these dynamic shifts that have happened, I think, in the industry, they have helped control costs. Like, it's not all bad, right? There's definitely control measures and things that are put in place, but I think that at times it's fractured care, or it's made it more difficult for an organization to say, well, okay, do I have a choice of the formulary anymore? Can my pharmacy actually buy that product and give it to our patient, or no?
Right.
Sometimes the answer is no. Your pharmacy can't. You might still be able to treat the patient there, but the drug has to come through this other channel to the organization, which is disruptive, right?
So I'm we're well past time. As you know, I usually aim for about 20, 25 minutes. I'm going to do the one thing I've never thought I'd do before, which is this talk was so interesting. I'm going to go back and actually listen to my talk again. I've never done that before because there's so much great information in here. So so thank you for all of that. I'm sure I'm going to have more questions after we talk, and I hope you'd consider coming back at that point.
Yeah, we can do a part two. I'm up for that.
Part two. Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if people are trying to reach you, what's the best way for people to reach you?
The email address, my personal one, or the info at healthcare.net. That way it hits a couple of people on our team. So if I am busy and tied up in a few things, someone can get back to you. I have some other, very smart people that work with me, and a lot of times smarter than I am, and more than happy to help answer a question as well. But this area is a great discussion point, Darshan, because I think it's been one of the big changes in healthcare in the last 5+ years, where some of it's been good, like I said, and some of it has been disruptive, and it's disrupted these normal formulary choices, distribution points, and controls that were in place. And I don't know if it's always been best for the patient.
Well, we got to find out more, because in the end, we're all here for the patient. So
we should
make it work.
We should be.
This was amazing. Again, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll be in touch soon.
Great. Thank you.